It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us. What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "Nana, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different. Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
Is the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Good evening. I'm going to bring you the latest on my saga with NatWest, which took a turn for the worse today. We'll also get some very interesting comments the Chancellor Jeremy Hunt has made to GB News' Liam Halligan. Donald Trump is due to appear in court in Washington, D.C. at 9 p.m. UK time, facing 4 serious charges. And joining me tonight on Talking Pint, star of radio and TV, Pat Sharp will be here. But before all of that, let's get the news with Polly Middlehurst.
Nigel, thank you. Good evening. The top story tonight from the GB Newsroom is that the Bank of England has raised its interest rate for the 14th time in a row. It's increasing from 5 to 5.25%. That's the highest base rate since 2008. The bank says it expects inflation to be halved by the end of the year. That's one of the government's key targets. The increase puts pressure on borrowers, mortgage holders and households struggling with budgets. The Chancellor Jeremy Hunt told GB News the government's plan, though, is working.
Well, the Bank of England forecasts today say that we will avoid recession, and in a year's time we'll get inflation down to about 3%, 2.8% I think is the number. So although it's very tough when interest rates go up for families or for businesses that have got loans, what those forecasts are saying today is that if we stick to the plan, it is working, and we will end up with a soft landing and we can avoid a recession.
Well, the Shadow Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, says the government needs to do something.
A family that's looking to remortgage their property is going to be paying, on average, more than £200 extra every single month, and for some people it's much more than that. The government need to take responsibility for the fact that inflation in the UK is much higher than it is in comparable countries.
Now, the developing news this hour is that Donald Trump is currently making his way to Washington, D.C., as you've been hearing. He's going to appear in court there. The former president is charged with plotting to overturn the 2020 US presidential election result. He's due in court at 9 p.m. That's UK time, and we'll keep you up to date with the very latest on that as it happens. Now, 5 activists that scaled the Prime Minister's home in North Yorkshire have been arrested today on suspicion of causing criminal damage and being a public nuisance. The protesters draped Rishi Sunak's home in black fabric in protest against the 100 new North Sea oil and gas licences, which have been granted by Rishi Sunak. He says he won't apologise for the exploration. GB News asked the Greenpeace CEO if it's justified to turn up at the Prime Minister's house.
We checked before going. We made sure there was nobody there. It was planned with utmost care. We knocked on the door to identify who we were and what we were doing. And then first there was no answer. Then the staff came in. We had a nice chat with them. And then
you jumped on his roof?
We delivered the message that what he's doing is unacceptable in a climate emergency. He's the Prime Minister. And this decision, let me finish, is on him.
Well, you can see more of that interview tonight on Dan Wootton at 9 o'clock. The Deputy Prime Minister says asylum seekers will be on board the Bibby Stockholm barge in the coming weeks. The first group of migrants was originally scheduled to move into the accommodation in Dorset on Tuesday, but the delay caused by issues surrounding health and safety of port workers got in the way. Oliver Dowden says he's confident the problems can be addressed. That's it. You're with GB News across the UK, on TV, in your car, on digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying play GB News. Now, though, it's Farage.
Good evening. It was my subject access request put into Coutts Bank that showed me the full horror and truth of their political prejudice and the reason they decided to close out my account. It's what began this big debate about debanking in this country, and that's a very, very good thing. So shortly after that, I submitted a subject access request to NatWest to ask what personal information they held on me. The answer came back today. They said my case was complex. And as a result of that, they did not need to answer within 30 days. They would give me an answer in full by the 21st of October. They've kicked the can down the road. Interestingly, in the last few minutes, I received a reply from the Information Commissioner's Office. And I'd gone to them to say, would they please investigate the clear, obvious GDPR breaches that were committed by Dame Alison Rose, the former CEO of NatWest, when she briefed the BBC. And you'll never guess what the ICO told me. They've told me my case is, you've guessed it, complex. And therefore they can't investigate it immediately. If ever I saw the establishment clubbing together to protect their own, well, then this is it. I also wrote a letter to NatWest Group on Monday requesting a meeting because I want to find out how many other people has this happened to within Coutts and NatWest, and I want to try and make sure that it never happens to anybody else ever again. Well, they are refusing to have that meeting because they're relying on the inquiry that's been set up by Sir Howard Davis, where he's appointed a city law firm called Travers Smith, headed up by a chap, he's the emeritus chair, called Chris Hale. But the problem with that is that Chris Hale, in the past, has described Brexiteers as xenophobes, racists, and being nostalgic for the past. So they've asked a man to investigate what happened to me, who's used almost exactly the same language that appeared in that original Coutts file. So, as you may have gathered, I'm somewhat frustrated and angry tonight that the establishment is doing its best to kick the can down the road on all of this, and as a result, I've got no choice but to act and get my lawyers to move and to start sending some much stronger letters. There is a lot at stake here, far more than my relationship with that bank, but a whole scandal that is going on within this industry. Now, interestingly, this afternoon, the Chancellor Jeremy Hunt sat down with GB News' Liam Halligan. It was very interesting. This is what he had to say.
What I would say is that as a major shareholder in NatWest, we were very concerned that after this error of judgment, which was conceded by NatWest, they were following the course they were. Why? Because in a free society, being able to say what you believe is a fundamental human right. But in the modern world, we all need bank accounts. So if you have to worry that you might be expressing a view that someone in a bank doesn't agree with and you could lose your bank account, that has a chilling effect on free speech. That is not acceptable. It is also against the banking regulations. It's effectively against the law. So today I've written to the regulator that has the power to put big fines on banks, and I've said, I want to know, is this widespread? Was it a one-off thing, or is it more widespread? And what are we doing about it to make sure that banks obey the law?
Well, GB News' economics and business editor Liam Halligan joins me now. Quite strong stuff from the Chancellor.
It was quite strong. I feel your frustration, Nigel. The kind of the people in the dark, if you like, are trying to close ranks and get you to, frankly, you know, something off.
Be off.
Family show.
Yeah.
But the Chancellor, front and centre, asked me to ask him about your case, which is very unusual.
Yeah.
This is the second most powerful bloke in the country.
Yeah.
Right? And it's really interesting. He has tonight written, as he said there, to the Financial Conduct Authority. He's made that letter available to us. The Chancellor's also said publicly, free speech is a fundamental human right. You can agree or disagree with Nigel Farage, but everyone must be able to express their opinions. I've written to the FCA. They have the right to fine banks very large sums of money if they find this practice is widespread. I want to know if it is, says Jeremy Hunt, and I want to know what they are doing about it. It'd be very interesting to see if the Chancellor responds, frankly, to this foot dragging and long grassing, as we call it.
Which is what I'm getting,
yeah. If he sees that this is happening, if he clocks it, I know his advisors are watching this show. He's probably watching this show himself.
Yeah.
Is he going to do anything about that procrastination and foot dragging that you have been subjected to over the last 24 hours?
It's interesting, isn't it? And because the problem is, you know, and we discussed the FCA last night. Sheldon Mills, one of the top people there, has been a director, indeed the boss of Stonewall. It's been that culture, that politicisation, if you like, of our banks that it seemed to me that the FCA themselves have almost encouraged.
It seems to me some of our top banks have become a plaything for massively over-entitled people who aren't as clever as they think they are, but they're kind of, you know, establishment good eggs, good chaps, though, of course, these days they're not always chaps.
Yeah.
And yet the banking industry is, as I think Jeremy Hunt understands, at least from this writing, they should be plumbers, not architects. They are a utility. And the fact that people are being deliberately debanked for their political views is a complete outrage. This is about so much more than you. You know, just today, my own newspaper, The Telegraph, has been reporting that some rural groups who organise the local hunts, obviously they don't chase live foxes anymore because that's against the law, but they do drag hunting, they do point-to-point. You know, you live in the countryside like I do. These are hugely diverse organisations, people from all parts of society, from literally the lord of the manor to stable hands, get together. These local hunt groups, they're using so-called sum-up machines that are backed by banks in order that people can make donations, you know, tombolas, local charity fundraising, which is by tapping their card. Some hunt groups are now being debanked. They're not doing anything illegal.
I mean, legal activities in this
Urban liberals
country,
just don't like them.
Yeah, you know, gunsmiths are having the same problem. Anybody involved in the oil or gas industry. I had a chap write to me the other day who's an engineer on coal-fired power stations, which, interestingly, we've been firing up again this summer, and they're all being debanked as well. Liam, what has been interesting to me, I've had a sense over the last couple of weeks that here's a big issue that actually is uniting Leavers and Remainers in a remarkable way.
It absolutely is. It's uniting, I think, Remainers who are intellectually honest enough and are anti-tribal enough that they can bring themselves, with huge respect, Nigel, through gritted teeth, to move onto the same side of the room that you are, because you are, for them, obviously, a hate figure. You've spent your adult life winding up Conservatives about the European Union to hugely successful, and now you're exposing that a lot of their establishment friends are using our banking industry almost as a kind of a prop to promote their own virtue to their friends.
And to be moral arbiters.
Completely mad. It's completely mad.
No,
and particularly here you've got a bank that's 40% owned by the state. You've got an elected government that is trying to give out drilling licences so we can use more North Sea oil and gas, because it actually generates a much, much lower carbon footprint and is strategically useful for us and also generates tax revenue for the UK. And NatWest, this 40% owned bank, says it's not going to lend money for the oil and gas industry. That's insane.
Yeah, no, it is. Quick thought, interest rates up again today, 14th rise in a row. The right decision, the wrong decision?
I think it's the wrong decision. I've been writing for many months that we should freeze interest rates. And interesting that the Deputy Governor of the Bank of England, a bloke called Ben Broadbent, who, of course, used to work for Goldman Sachs. It seems to be,
obviously
compulsory that you have to have worked for Goldman Sachs to be as big cheese, be Deputy Governor of the Bank of England, probably being lined up to be the next governor. He acknowledged in the press conference today that monetary policy takes 18 months to 2 years to actually have an effect. So raising interest rates now, that's not... Of course, it has an immediate effect if you're on a variable rate mortgage, and it's a painful effect. But he's admitting that this monetary policy works with long and variable lags. I feel strongly, and a lot of people now agree with me, I've been saying it for months, that the Bank of England should hold fire and see what the impact of the now 14 successive interest rate rises. 10 or 11 interest rate rises would have been enough. Since then, it's just been pain for ordinary households and firms in the real economy, and it's been all about the Bank of England trying to assert itself in order to salvage its lost credibility.
And it could drive us into recession.
Compounding the error, and
Q4.
It could easily drive us into recession.
Very quick thought, Wilco, household name, 12,000 jobs, hardware store.
The one thing I'd say here, right, it hasn't gone to administration. What they've given is an NOI. You're a businessman, you know, that's a notice of intent. They're saying they're thinking about going into administration. They now have 2 weeks during which they can find a new buyer, as the fashion chain Joules did in December when Next bought them, saved over 100 outlets. Like, I'm not saying that Wilco are going to be rescued, but I do think they've got a fighting chance. They can at least keep some of those 400 stores open, and some of those 12,000 jobs can be salvaged.
Let's hope, for the sake of the people working there, that they can do that. Liam, as ever, thank you. In a moment, debanking, and I'm going to talk to Sir Vince Cable. Going to find out why we lost our universal right to a bank account and what can be done.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate. Both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prison.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
in a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Like all families, we have arguments every now and then, but actually we agree on what the mission of GB News is, and that's the most fundamentally important thing.
GB News provides the kind of platform that lets all voices be heard. We don't hold back. We're free to say what we really think.
Just because some people who live in a tiny little Westminster bubble think that their particular story is important, that's not the most important story for me.
And often they will be difficult stories, stories that you won't find on the establishment media.
Because what people think in the north of England may be very different to what they're thinking in the home counties.
We're going to carry on telling the world what life is really like for households up and down the UK.
We love to be in your car, in your kitchen as you're having your breakfast. Whatever you're doing, you are part of the show. If it matters to you, it matters to us.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Sir Vince Cable has been a professional economist, leader, of course, of the Liberal Democrats and part of that coalition government from 2010 to 2015. Vince, the Mail on Sunday had a Freedom of Information request suggesting that up to 1,000 bank accounts are being closed in Britain every day. Did you have any idea how big this problem was?
No, and I think, you know, it's great you brought this to the surface. You know, I think a lot of people are being debanked. Now, I think a lot of it's commercial. You know, people have very low incomes, they have bad credit records, all kind of business reasons. But, you know, there obviously has been moral judgments, political judgments. I mean, I noticed sex workers were protesting that in large numbers that they've been excluded.
Well, they're in the cash industry, I guess.
Doesn't approve of their industry. And other people have just been excluded by geography. I mean, you will have noticed, I mean, most people have the retreat of the banking network. And so people in villages, small communities don't have access to an account.
This makes people very angry because when it all went wrong, in 08 and 09, it was the taxpayer that had to step in. And, of course, in the case of the NatWest Group, still nearly 40% of it is owned by the taxpayer. And in return, they've closed 5,000 bank branches around the country. So what are people, local people, taking cash?
Well, one of the things I tried to do when I was in government was to get the banks to agree to a last bank in town policy that when it got to the last branch, one of them would stay put. And they agreed to that.
Did they?
And also agreed that the post office could step in and provide that function. But as I understand it, this government didn't follow it up, and the banks have more or less been allowed to pursue their own short-term interests.
You see, you know, you go back a few decades and people got their wage packets in cash and you could spend cash everywhere. The pandemic hastened this move towards more of a cashless society. You can't live in the 21st century without a functioning bank account and cards attached to it. I mean, it's as vital, isn't it, as water and electricity?
Yes, well, digitisation is now everywhere, but the problem is that millions of people have just been left behind. I mean, if they're relatively elderly and they're not fluent on internet, or they've had a credit history and they're trying to put their lives back together again, of course, the banks are no longer interested in these people. There is a problem of financial exclusion. The government tried, 12 years ago to introduce basic bank accounts to help people set up. I haven't heard any reference to the banks to how to make this system
Didn't we
work
used to have this? When we had the Giro Bank attached to the post office, and as they have in our neighbours in France and Germany, we were in a position where everybody had the right to an account, and that's gone, hasn't it?
I don't know whether this was ever enshrined in law and constitution, but people have to have access to bank accounts. You can operate, some people operate in a very limited way just with cash under their bed or something.
But that's not the
you can't
answer.
operate like that. You've got to operate, and particularly if you're in business,
so
you've got no alternative.
Could post office counters, could this be the way?
Well, I tried in government to give the post office the power to provide financial services, banking services, and they do this, but in a very restrictive way. I mean, you know, with the big drama around the post office and the way it treated sub-postmasters. They're a very
shocking, yeah,
tightly controlled organisation, but they have had limited powers. And in a sensible world, they would have more powers.
And equally, of course, the post offices are closed all over the country as well. So again, if you haven't got a
post
car,
offices and banks.
you haven't got a car, you're living outside the big cities.
But I think, in a way, we're just dealing with the tip of an iceberg here. It's not just banking, but as you rightly said, you know, the banking crisis. I was heavily involved in all that at the time.
Yeah.
You know, they were bailed out, but they still ultimately depend on the taxpayer. If they screw up, you know, indulge in too much casino banking, you know, at the end of the day, we're liable for
So aren't we due something in return?
Yes, and you know, your issue is a very big one, but there's also the issue at the moment they've got an enormous windfall from this sudden increase in interest rates. Most of that money is not going to their depositors, as it should be, or providing some kind of funding to help distressed borrowers reschedule. I mean, that should be their priority. And if we were operating the banks as a utility, as they should be, and I heard Liam making that argument a minute ago, that's what they would be regulated to do. But as far as I can see, they're just pocketing the windfall.
Can we launch a campaign for the universal right for everybody to have a bank account?
Yes, I think you would have to be careful about people who won't bank responsibly, and you know there are people who are involved in semi-fraud and so on. So the banks do have to have a power to exclude on genuine banking commercial grounds, but subjective judgments of the kind that you've experienced and many others have experienced is completely off the wall and shouldn't be accepted.
Well, I have a feeling, Vince, this one's going to run and run.
I'm sure it will.
Thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Thank you.
And giving us some explanations. Well, in a moment, Charlie Peters has done a special investigation, and it's quite shocking that an imam intimately involved with the National Health Service has been over to meet the Taliban and appears to approve of much of what they say. All of that in just a moment.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything, I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Alongside the Taliban's foreign minister and some other ministers as well. Now, this foreign minister, Amir Muttaqi, he was said to have led a ginormous, systematic jihadist propagandist network before 2001 when the US took over. A very controversial figure for Mr. Ghani and his delegation to be photographed alongside. And they also met with the Taliban's Chief Justice, Minister Sheikh Abdul Haqqani, a founder of the Taliban, so senior, in fact, that he's been in charge of putting down various laws regarding women and girls, their rights to education, various reports to the UN and international observers since 2021 saying that rights have really rolled back in that country. The EU have sanctioned him directly, a travel ban and an asset freeze because of that. But still, for this NHS chaplain, not someone he's ashamed of meeting. Indeed, the minister said in a statement that Afghanistan was a Sharia-compliant government, and he was hoping to set an example. He said this while meeting with the British delegation. But most alarmingly, this was a statement released in Pashtun. The Supreme Court claimed that the UK delegation said that British Muslims were very happy about what the Taliban-run government was doing, and that the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan was an example, and they needed it to survive. They added that the IEA was a role model of Sharia in the world, according to this British delegation. And we, of course, we went to Mr. Ghani and other members of the delegation asking, do you believe this? Do you support this? Yeah. We've heard nothing. And the NHS, particularly this South London NHS Trust, they've also not provided a statement.
Well, I'm joined by Dr. Taj Hargay, been on the programme before many times with us, Provost of the Oxford Institute for British Islam. Are you in favour of what the Taliban do?
No, absolutely not. For example, 2 weeks after they seized power, we had a big demonstration outside Downing Street to protest their seizure coming to office, and we had no mainstream support. The press ignored it, and so within 2 weeks we were already saying that this is going to be disastrous for the Afghan people, and particularly women, and we were just ignored. So from the get-go, we realized that the Taliban is not speaking for Muslims. They are speaking for medieval chauvinist culture that has no place in modern day society, whether there or here.
So, I mean, what do you say about a delegation, including, an NHS imam going, being photographed, being supportive of this extreme culture?
Well, we have a big problem here. For example, this imam was a chaplain at the hospital, but we also have imams as chaplains at prisons and at colleges and universities. All of them are actually Taliban in disguise. Because if you look at them, what are the telltale signs? Firstly, they're all members of the FHB, Facial Hair Brigade. Secondly, they all wear Middle Eastern and Indo-Pak costumes because they think that's the way you should be. Islam doesn't have a cultural obsession with clothing or with beards and whatever. And so the way to weed these people out of important positions like chaplains at hospitals, colleges and prisons and so forth, you used to have vet them for their theology. Now, if you investigate Suleiman Ghani and others, all of them are in favor of female oppression. All of them in favor of giving no rights to LGBT and so forth. All of them. So how come the British establishment, in this case, the hospitals, the prisons, the colleges, allow such people to have such positions?
Yeah, well, and if you want to come on this programme and answer this, you haven't answered yet to Charlie Peters, you can. But who sorts this out, Taj? I mean, you know, is it not a fair criticism that Islam has not been very good at policing itself in Britain?
Absolutely, but then we are living in this society. I have to follow law and order here, and so whoever's in authority here, whether it's the prisons, hospitals, colleges, whatever, they need to make sure that the people representing this faith are not Taliban in disguise, are not Salafi extremists. And
how big is the problem? I mean, you know, you're being very frank about this.
Absolutely, the problem is huge. But for example, the point is, the establishment people like you and even the mainstream media and this media, they are not giving us enough support to fight these people. I mean, we need to defeat them in terms of the ideas, to show them, listen, that their perversity, their distortion of Islam has got nothing to do with the faith. This is just a caricature of medieval culture that has no place, like I've said, in modern-day society.
Well, I can assure you that you're very... You know, we're very happy to have you on here saying that. Some strong words there from Taj.
Yes, indeed, and I think they're quite necessary because Mr. Ghani was not alone in terms of his associations on that trip. Other members of this British delegation include a man called Haytham al-Haddad, a notoriously controversial cleric within Britain who has been banned or had talks at universities postponed due to accusations made towards him about anti-Semitism, about homophobia, and also accusations that he is an extremist regarding female genital mutilation. So this group of people representing Britain, in their view, in Afghanistan, meeting with senior Taliban ministers, and indeed, most concerningly, as GB News has revealed tonight, linked to the NHS.
Yeah. Charlie Peters, thank you. And Taj, thank you.
Thank you.
You spoke very, very strongly there, and I'm sure it'll get a huge amount of support from our audience, and very important too. Now, in about an hour and a half's time, Donald Trump will be appearing in a courtroom in Washington, D.C. He's already made his way to the city. Quite how much direct footage we're going to get. 4 quite serious charges are going to be put in front of him. And from 9 o'clock, you can tune in to Dan Wootton's show, live coverage of this with some very, very big guests, OK? Before we go to the next break, I just want to show you something. The What the Farage moment. This lady is a Labour Party Newcastle councillor. Have a look at what she said on TikTok.
Hi listeners, Iram Ali here, immigration solicitor. Are you in the UK without a valid visa? Are you illegal or have you overstayed your visa? Do not fear, Iram Ali is here to help you regularise your visa in the UK and submit an application to the Home Office based on your human rights. It is extremely important to make sure you become legal in the UK. There is an extremely hostile environment for overstayers here. So you must make sure that you can submit an application to the Home Office, become legal and be en route to indefinite leave to remain. So contact me, let's have that conversation and work out what needs to be done to get your stay here in the UK. Okay, thanks. Bye.
There you go, an elected Labour councillor from Newcastle doing everything she possibly can to encourage people who've come here illegally to stay. And we did, of course, approach the Labour Party for a comment, and frankly, we got fobbed off with the Conservatives should stop taking the public for fools, stop blaming everyone else and do their job. Now, actually, maybe you, as a Labour Party, ought to do your job. Now, 5 protesters managed to get onto the roof of the Prime Minister's home in Yorkshire this morning, draping it with black material, holding up banners up on the roof, generally behaving pretty disgracefully. At least I think so. Well, GB News' Ben Leo decided he would return the favour to Greenpeace by going straight into their offices.
We checked before going. We made sure there was nobody there. It was planned with utmost care. We knocked on the door to identify who we were and what we were doing. And then first there was no answer. Then the staff came in. We had a nice chat with them. And then
you jumped on his roof?
We delivered the message that what he's doing is unacceptable in a climate emergency. He's the Prime Minister. And this decision, let me finish, is on him.
Well, there we are, Ben Leo there, and he did sort of just walk straight into the building, and they asked whether he had permission. He said, well, you didn't need it, did you, when you went to Rishi Sunak's house? But, you know, that's where we are with all of this. It seems that climate activists seem to think that actually, you know, the law doesn't really apply to them, and you'll get the full interview tonight, again, on what's going to be, I suspect, a rather busy...
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "Nana, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different. Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
Is the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my new show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m, where real people get to meet those in power and hold them to account. Every week, we'll be hearing your views from up and down the country in the real world. Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Now, let's be honest, I am nostalgic for the 1980s. I was working in London, in the city, the foreign money was coming in, the music was great, the country was getting richer, and yeah, sure, there were parts of the country did badly, but if you were in London in the 1980s, it was pretty cool. But it has to be said, not everything about the 1980s has aged particularly well, including this clip of a band who called themselves Pat and Mick. Have a look at this. Oh dear, oh dear, oh dear. Well, I'm joined now by one-time pop star, but also legendary radio and television presenter, Pat Sharp. Pat, welcome.
Cheers, Nigel.
To the program.
Thanks for running that clip. Yeah.
Well, but it was actually, you did it all not just for fun, but you did it for a good reason.
We did. It was for Capital Radio's Help a London Child. We had 5 hit singles. We raised over 300 grand, and it was for, as DJ said in those days, charity with a D.
Yeah.
Charity beat. And it was, you know, it was fun to do. Once a year, we got to play at being pop stars, and we made the songs with Stock Aitken Waterman, and we ended up on top of the pops with the Radio 1 guys having to introduce the Capital Radio guys.
Oh, that must have hurt. That must have hurt. That must have hurt. But 300 grand you raised?
Yeah, in total. We had 5 hit singles and an album, yeah.
Which 300 grand, and we're going back 30 plus years.
Yeah.
Kind of real money.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So a little bit of embarrassment doesn't matter to raise that sort of money.
No, I mean, it's not embarrassing for me because at the end of the day, that's how I looked, and that's what the 80s were about. You know, I had this hair, and it's lasted to this day. People still say to me, like, "Oh, you cut your hair?" I go, "Yeah, just 3 decades ago."
So, Pat, you know, you're from a very, very sort of middle class, quite well-to-do, semi-posh background.
Public school.
Yeah, merchant tailors, public school, and all the rest of it. And then probably, you know, your parents thought you're going to go and become a stockbroker or a lawyer or a doctor or, you know, but no, this obsession with music obviously was there very early.
Yeah, they were right behind me from the word go and kicking me to do it behind me. So they helped me, you know, helped me get my first car, helped me put the records in the boot when I went off to Germany when I was 18 and worked in a club in Germany with a bunch of Schweppes boxes which fitted 7-inch singles really well. I got them from the pub, I think, and someone threw them out and I took them. And then I went in my Cortina and went off to Germany.
So when did this start? Was it very early that music, that you decided this was it?
Yeah, I mean, you know, you hear about people taping the top 40 and getting really annoyed because the DJ keeps coming on and they're waiting with the pause button so they can cut the DJ out. Well, I would do it the other way round and record the DJ and the jingles and the links and cut the songs out because I wanted to hear how people were doing things for the craft that I eventually went on to hone.
So being a DJ, that was it? That was the ambition?
Oh, only that, yeah, always.
And, you know, you work your way through, and actually, in a sense, you get there fairly quickly, don't you? Because, I mean, you know, Radio 1 was just so huge, wasn't it? I mean, the Radio 1 road shows, I mean, it was absolutely blooming enormous. And you managed to get onto Radio 1 at a relatively young age.
20.
Not bad, is it?
Yeah, I covered Steve Wright's show for a week when I was 20. I think I was the youngest ever Radio 1 DJ at the time. And maybe even to this day, I'm not sure. But when you say it was the biggest thing, they didn't have a lot of competition. There wasn't too many commercial radio stations.
Yeah, and then sort of Capital comes along and starts to challenge it, and now with DAB and streaming and all sorts of options. But our biggest radio station, of course, is still Radio 2. Yeah. Radio 2 is massive, and it's had this really extraordinarily loyal audience. You sort of think back through the years of Jimmy Young and Terry Wogan and these giant figures. And kind of Ken Bruce was one of those figures, wasn't he?
Yeah.
Have they made a terrible mistake in retiring him off?
Well, I don't know if they did retire him off. I don't know the whole story as to how he went to Greatest Hits, but he did, and he's done brilliantly today with the new figures that have come out, as has the station. So good for Ken. I guess he wanted to play the sort of songs that he loves and perhaps not play some of the stuff that Radio 2 is now playing, which is
Radio 2, they've moved Steve Wright on. You know, I mean, they've gone for younger presenters, but they're losing a fair bit of market share, aren't they?
Well, today they did, yeah. Who knows? I mean, it's a long end game, isn't it? Every 3 months there's RAJAR, same as you guys, I guess, for your figures, isn't it? So, you know, you get your TV figures, they get their radio ones, and at the moment, today's a good day for Greatest Hits Radio because they did well, and Ken Bruce has obviously helped them get there.
No, listen, I'm in full
Good
marks.
signing.
No, and Popmaster and you know, all the rest of it. But you had a great career, didn't you, in radio? I mean, Radio 1, you know, Capital, which was a really big, buzzy thing to be part of.
Yeah, when I was on it, it was great because I was Chris Tarrant's warm-up. So every morning I'd you know, get in there, basically, you know. Sorry, when I say I was his warm-up, it was the other way round. But I suddenly realised, how could that be the other way round? How could Chris Tarrant be my warm-up? So I did mid-mornings. He was on before me. But he wasn't my warm-up. He was Chris Tarrant.
He did the breakfast, didn't he? And so it was a really big thing.
It just sounds odd saying he was my warm-up, doesn't it?
So how do you make this transition from being, you know, a radio professional, the thing you always wanted to do, and then suddenly it's Funhouse, it's TV, and it's huge, and millions watch it, and it goes on for year after year after year. What was the switch from radio to telly?
Well, it was never really a switch because I carried on doing radio and I'm still doing it to this day. But Funhouse only took me 1 week a year. I was just telling Chloe, your floor manager, because telling her all about it there, she was a bit young to remember it. I only spent 1 week a year going to Scotland, and at STV, I would make 7 days worth of shows. 2 shows a day, 2 times 7 is 14, that's 14 weeks worth of shows, and that was it. People think I lived in this funhouse with the twins for like 10 years, but I only spent 10 weeks doing 10 years worth of shows.
But it was a real cult thing for kids, wasn't it?
Oh yeah, very much so. Biggest rated kids TV show, I think, of all time.
I think it probably is.
Yeah.
And that kind of, I guess there are people of a certain age who see you in the street. And
I get the best thing, Nigel. People will come up to me, I'll be doing a gig, and he'll get this great big bloke come up to me and he'll say, "You Pat?" And I'll go, yeah. He goes, "Just want to say one thing." I go, "Yeah?" He goes, "You made my childhood." And I go, "Wow, that's probably just as well."
Thank God for that. You look at kids' TV today, it's different. It's more fractured, isn't it?
I don't watch it.
No.
I've got grandkids now.
Yeah, but it is more fractured, isn't it? There are so many more different things we can turn on and different channels.
I mean, look, the reason why we probably did so well is when I was on Funhouse, there was 4 channels, and now there's 400.
Yeah, I mean, name your number.
Yeah.
And it's funny, isn't it? I mean, television is changing with streaming and all the choice. The thing that amazes me is kind of the oldest medium of this, radio. The appeal of radio never seems to go away.
Very personable, very one-to-one. You never go on the radio and say, "Hi, everybody, how you doing?" You say, "Hey, how are you?" And you talk to that one person who's either in the bath or in the gym or wherever they are, and that's your person that you've got in your head, and that's the person you're talking to, like now.
This was the famous Wogan quote, wasn't it? I think Parkinson said to him, you know, "Terry, you've got, is it 8 million or 9 million?"
Oh, he had more.
And it was huge numbers he had.
16 or something.
I mean, unbelievable. And, you know, Wogan said, "Well, actually, I've only got one listener."
Yeah, his wife.
And that was the idea.
Yeah.
Donald Trump's plane is landing. We'll show you a couple of quick clips. So there, in comes the Trump plane. He's back in Washington, D.C. Interestingly, only the second time that he's been back in the American capital since he left the presidency. So all that drama is going to unfold in an hour and 10 minutes' time when he appears in court, and you can get all of that live with Dan Wootton and some really, really great guests.
I know that's quite serious and everything that you're talking about, and this is a news channel, but it did remind me of Alan Partridge there, because you suddenly went from talking about stuff with me, and you went, "Just got this in. Roger Moore is on the roundabout on the North Circular."
Well, my kids take the mickey out of me for Alan Partridge, so thank you. So what happened to the mullet? Come on.
Well, it was getting a bit long, and I thought I'd give the girls a chance, so I cut it off. Now it's quite sensible now, isn't it? Quite sensible.
How long did you have the mullet?
Too long, but not so long that, you know, there isn't a calendar coming out at Christmas.
Really?
Yeah. I'm in the world's greatest mullet calendar as we speak, but now they're going to do my own one.
Wow, well, there you are. You never seem to stop, Pat. Now, you've been working recently a bit at Greatest Hits, which we talked about a moment ago.
I did, for 4 years since it started.
Yeah, and it's going pretty well, isn't it, as you say?
The station's fantastic. As you say, today with their figures, and Ken Bruce has made it better than ever, yeah.
Now, you got into a bit of trouble lately. That's what the newspapers tell me. You told a joke.
Okay.
You told a joke at an event and people took offence. Do we take offence too easily these days?
I don't know. I think it's up to the individual as to who takes offence to what one says or what one even thinks these days about saying. But for me, yeah, you know, I just do my job. I get out there and do what I do and try not to upset anybody. So I hope I didn't.
Yeah, well, I tell you what, causing offence is really, really easy. So, Pat, what is next? Are you just going to go on doing what you've done forever?
I hope so, yeah. I mean, I look at someone like Tony Blackburn, who's a good mate of mine, and me and Tony, we have breakfast together every couple of weeks, and he's still going, and he's 80 now. So I'm going to be 62 this year, so yep. I've got a bit of life left in me, and we'll continue to stroll on. I'm doing so many gigs. Tomorrow night I'm playing the Rewind Festival, the opening party. Saturday I'm in Birmingham, and then I've got gigs in Oslo and Dubai and all over the place.
Oh wow! So you are mega busy.
Oh really? But never been busier actually. Never been busier. Never had more fun and more people saying you made my childhood. So
no, that's really nice. By the way, I've got to confess, I'm a Tony Blackburn fan.
Yeah, who isn't?
I listen to Sounds of the 60s at the weekends.
Yeah, there you go.
And I love it. He's spinning a record from 1964 or 5 and says, well, I remember when I first did this. Yeah. You could be the next Tony Blackburn. Pat, what an absolute pleasure.
Thank you. Cheers.
Have you on Talking Pints. Really enjoyed it.
Thank you very much.
Very much.
Thank you.
Indeed. Now, Jacob Rees-Mogg joins me in the studio. Jacob, a very interesting, I thought, interview, an intervention by the Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, talking to GB News' Liam Halligan earlier. What did you make of that? I mean,
yes,
quite strong talk, wasn't it?
Quite strong talk. Very, very encouraging, what he was saying, particularly about the banking scandal. Now, actually, what I'm going to be talking to Liam about is whether the Bank of England, having been slow to start with, is now going too far. And so we'll be drawing on Liam's expertise to examine the bank's interest rate decision.
But I'm used to, Jacob, I'm well used to Conservative senior politicians, including chancellors, saying, we're going to do this and we're going to do that, and not actually delivering. And what's clear to me is this whole sort of woke culture that we've talked about in the banks. Actually, a lot of it's coming from the FCA. Is Hunt tough enough to grip this?
Do you know, I think Hunt is pretty tough. That he managed to be Health Secretary for 6 years and to do a very respectable job in one of the hardest jobs in government, and to keep it going for a long time and to take on people who didn't agree with what he was trying to do. So yes, I think Jeremy Hunt is tough enough to deliver, but I've also put forward a legislative amendment to try and ensure that people are protected with their bank accounts, because ultimately legislation is more powerful than a regulator's whim. A regulator's whim can change. Legislation is very hard to change.
Yeah, no, well, I hope you succeed with that, Jacob. And actually, isn't it amazing that, you know, I sat there with Sir Vince Cable earlier on, and on this issue, that people need, that, you know, they've got to have the right to a bank account. They can't survive in the 21st century without it. Actually, remarkably, we've got leavers and remainers coming together.
It's very important, and it's very interesting, because you and I, by nature and inclination, are free marketeers. And if people don't want to do business, that's a matter for them. But the banks are different, because the banks are, A, so heavily regulated in all their business lines, but also they have a guarantee from the taxpayer that they're not allowed to fail. They are too big to fail, too economically important. And if you have the taxpayer standing behind you, you have to behave in a reasonable way to all your potential customers, not just to your favoured few.
No, I agree with Jacob. And, you know, hey, you know, they got into trouble back in 2008. They were too big to fail. Our taxes went up to bail them out. And in return, what have they done? They've closed 5,000 branches all around the country. They're debanking 1,000 people a day. They don't want small businesses to lodge cash with them. And they've let us down very, very badly. Well, lots coming up over the course of the next few hours. Jacob Rees-Mogg up next. Dan Wootton from 9 with a lot of live shots in from Washington, D.C. Before all of that, is it too much to hope that the weather is going to get better?
The temperature's rising. Boxed Solar, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
I'm Alex Deakin, and this is your latest weather update from the Met Office for GB News. Some wet and windy weather heading in for Friday night and Saturday, but for many, Friday will be a dry and a bright day with perhaps a bit more sunshine than we've had of late. The wet and windy weather for Saturday coming from this area of low pressure. Ahead of it, though, a ridge of high pressure is trying to move in. It's not completely across the UK though, so still some heavy showers around this evening, and indeed overnight we'll keep some going over eastern Scotland and eastern England. The odd one further west, but many places will become dry overnight with some clearer spells and temperatures dipping down to about 11 to 14 in most towns and cities. So on to Friday, and as I said, many places will be dry and bright, certainly in the west, across these eastern counties of England and indeed across much of the Midlands, probably to be quite a cloudy start, and there will be further outbreaks of rain over northeast England. And then in the afternoon, heavy showers could break out across Lincolnshire, East Anglia and the far southeast. Many western areas, though, looking dry and bright, a bit more sunshine than we've seen of late, light winds as well, so feeling pleasant if we do get some sunshine, but temperatures still only high teens, low 20s. And look at this, deep area of low pressure bringing wet and windy weather swinging across the country on Friday night and spreading more widely during Saturday. Northern Scotland will generally stay dry and bright, and it may brighten up in the southwest, but here we'll have the strongest winds. We do have a Met Office warning in place for those winds here and for the heavy rain across Northern Ireland. More details on those weather warnings on the Met Office website.
The temperature's rising. Boxed Solar, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news